When I tell people about the school that I attended for 1st through 8th grade, people sometimes don't believe me. They think that I'm misremembering when I say something like my 5th grade teacher was opposed to women's suffrage and that she believed that in the modern United States, women should not be allowed to vote. I can't bring anyone proof that this teacher really did hold that opinion. I'm sure that she voiced that opinion many times, but the time that she voiced it to me would have been in or around 2005. So I didn't have a smartphone that I could secretly use to record that conversation, even if I had wanted to. And I wouldn't have wanted to. Not at that time. I was on board. I was a radicalized 10-year-old. But I was scrolling through Reddit the other day and I came across this post on the subreddit called Ex-Traditional Catholic, which unlocked some memories for me. Christ and the Americas by Dr. Anne W. Carroll. I remember this book. We used this book, and I don't recall what grade it was, but I was probably roughly 11 years old when I was using this book in my history class. And I don't remember thinking that this book was weird at the time. This was all that I knew about history books. This seemed like a normal history book. But then I remember thinking a little later on that maybe my history books were a little revisionisty. In today's video, I am going to read from the first chapter of Christ in the Americas, and I will let you judge if this book is suitable for a history book, if it's propagandistic at all, or revisionistic, etc. Let's talk about it. Chapter 1 is called The New World Meets the Old, and as I am sure you can already gather, this chapter is about the European discovery of the Americas. Because, you know, what's the point about learning about the Americas before Christianity showed up, right? To be fair, though, there are 7.5 pages worth of information covering pre-Christian America, so, all right. But man, those 7.5 pages do a lot of stage setting. On page 3, we learn that the people who inhabited the Americas before Christianity arrived were particularly warlike and bloodthirsty. You know, unlike the very peaceful Spaniards and the famously anti-violence Portuguese who were about to show up. We also learn that the natives worshipped devil gods, and no, what is meant by devil gods is never actually explained, except that the natives would offer human sacrifices to these gods? Is that what makes them devil gods? That's kind of what the book seems to imply. But if that's the case, if any god to which humans have been sacrificed is a devil god, then is Yahweh a devil god too? Most historians seem to think that in the 7th century BC, it was part of the Jewish religion to offer child sacrifices to Yahweh. I won't dwell on this point long, but The Early History of God, Yahweh, and Other Deities in Ancient Israel by Mark Smith is free in full from the Internet Archive, and in Chapter 5, Section 3, this book points out that echoes of ancient Jewish child sacrifice can even be found in the Old Testament. Of course, the texts of the Old Testament were finalized long after child sacrifice had already ended, but Ezekiel 20:25-26 provides a theological rationale for Yahweh causing child sacrifice. Moreover, I gave them statutes that were not good and ordinances by which they could not have life. And I defiled them through their very gifts in making them offer by fire all their firstborns that I might horrify them. I did it that they may know that I am the Lord. Anyway, back to Christ in the Americas. Did you know that before Christianity showed up, the people living in the Americas, quote, lived in fear and slavery, without hope and without joy? Yep, every single last one of them. Hilariously, on page 7, the author of Christ in the Americas claims that the legend of St. Brendan the Navigator reaching North America from Ireland in the 6th century in a boat made of leather has been, quote, confirmed in all essential respects, despite the fact that, quote, although Brendan reached the New World, he made no lasting marks on it. To be clear, when the author says that St. Brendan's legendary voyage has been confirmed in all essential respects, all she means that is in 1978, an Irish explorer built a boat using techniques from the 6th century and was able to sail it from Ireland to Canada over the course of 13 months, which is awesome. But to be extra clear, there is no mention of St. Brendan's life at all until 100 years after he would have died. And even then, the source doesn't mention that he was a sailor at all. The legends about St. Brendan's voyage don't start until the 9th century, compared to him having lived, if he lived at all, in the 6th century. There appear to be many different versions of the story, and it seems impossible to tell which, if any, is original, but the legends all seem to have St. Brendan encountering a sea monster, and then some of them even include St. Brendan bumping into Judas. Yes, Judas Iscariot, while on an island on his voyage. But this legend has been confirmed in all essential respects, for sure. On page 9, we learn that Columbus and Queen Isabel's main motivations for sending Columbus to find a new route to the Indies was to bring Catholicism to people who had never heard of it before. How noble! However, Columbus did do something unwise. He enslaved some of the natives. Unwise. The section on Columbus ends with no discussion at all about anything else that Columbus may have done that was also unwise. This book makes no mention of the fact that Columbus gave an indigenous woman as a sex slave to his companion, Michel de Cuneo. We have Michel's own writings where he talks about how he took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would not have believed your ears. Eventually, we came to such terms, I assure you, that you would have thought that she had been brought up in a school for whores. I've heard Columbus apologists talk about how Columbus probably assumed that this slave would be for doing laundry and stuff, not a sex slave. And that's what indoctrination like Christ in the Americas does to you. Now, I do understand that this book is for 10 or 12-year-olds or something like that. So I'm not expecting this book to actually be explicit, but I am expecting this book to use a little harsher language than unwise to describe Columbus when the words that they're using to describe the natives are bloodthirsty and primitive. This is a trend in this book, as well as all of the other books that I grew up using in my FSSP school. On page 13, we learn that though some of the post-Columbus Spanish explorers were greedy and cruel, most were heroic and admirable, and they were filled with enthusiasm, courage, and a faith in God. Chapter 1 ends on page 18, promising that Chapter 2 will be all about Hernan Cortez, and that Cortez would challenge those devil gods directly and write his name forever in history. If I were to go into Chapter 2 in this video, then this video would get as long as most of my other videos, so I am ending it here, trying to keep this video a little shorter. But if you like this kind of thing, I would happily do another video on Chapter 2 as well. But I would like to end this video with a reflection. Me and my schoolmates, grew up being taught that public schools were centers of indoctrination. If you go to a public school, you will be indoctrinated into thinking that good and holy men like Columbus were actually not so good after all. You'll learn that gay people actually aren't depraved when we know that they are indeed depraved. You'll learn about other religions without those other religions being filtered through the lens of Catholic apologetics. And I won't try to say that there were no biases in the public education sector in the United States, but I will say that I was indoctrinated at my FSSP school. Christ in the Americas is clearly a piece of Catholic propaganda. Imagine that this was your history book. You were going to Mass every day, Every year you were watching the 1952 film The Miracle of Our Lady of Fatima. You were saying the rosary as a school on school days. And then on weekends and days off, you were saying the rosary as a family. How is this any less indoctrination than whatever goes on in public grade schools and public middle schools, which I can't speak to since I don't have any direct experience there? Critical thinking was never encouraged in my trad culture. We were taught that it's actually super pious to foster a medieval sort of piety, in as much as it's okay to be just super ignorant about everything going on in the world. Just kind of like go to work, earn your money, come home, say the rosary with your family, go to confession, go to mass, and don't worry about anything else. For all of those reasons, I don't always disagree when people describe how I grew up as cult-like. Pious ignorance was encouraged alongside of a deep distrust in any kind of non-trad Catholic approved source. I think that raising your kids in the way that I just described is a surefire recipe for making one of two different kinds of kids. The first is exactly what you want. Kids who lack any critical thinking skills, who will just go along with the religion because if they didn't, that would destroy social and familial relations. And the other kind of kid that might be a product of an upbringing like this are kids like me. Kids who did start to think critically, at least, and then who suffered the consequences. And I think it's a shame for any kid to turn out either of those ways. Thanks, everybody.